Culture Battles, Truth Shall Prevail. This book was originally produced in 2018. I'm updating it now. My presentation today begins with general principles, followed by specific topics and issues that are summarized at the end. This presentation is controversial and argumentative, especially regarding the current American culture and Black Lives Matter and Catholic Church trends, including the Pope and other leaders. Now, Canon Law 211 states that all faithful Christians have the duty and the right to work so that the divine message of salvation more and more reaches all people in every age and every land. The Christian faithful are free to make known to the pastors and bishops their needs, especially spiritual ones, and their desires. So if anyone has any questions about this YouTube presentation, which is not based on opinion or theories, but are documented facts, please respond to my website, which I'll give you at the end, which is 5starpubs.com. In this presentation, I have moral certainty in my work. So what drives history? Politics, economics, might it be culture? What men and women honor, cherish, worship? Isn't that the most dynamic element in human affairs? This is an image of me. So again, what I have wrote and presenting today, I have moral certitude. So the first thing we have to get into is the definition. Culture is what society considers good and honorable. It is misused today. So within the American culture, we have a mix of many other cultures: Hispanic, Black, Asian, Native Americans. So we are experiencing a culture crisis today. Part of culture is the arts, the music, language, science, and faith and traditions. Culture is what society considers good and honorable. Within American society, we have multiple cultures, such as Hispanic, Black, Asian, and many others. And they should be respected, each within itself. The arts, music, language, science, and faith and traditions within each of those. So today we're experiencing a cultural crisis, a totally misuse of the term in today's society. Here's what it should mean. Now, Robert Spitzer, he's a remarkable scientist and also a priest. He gave the best definition for culture. There's 10 of them. I'm going to focus on 3. One is non-malfeasance. So that means avoid unnecessary harm. Do not do to others what you would not have them do to you. Another is fundamental rights. The more fundamental the right is the one which is necessary for the possibility of the others. Limits to freedom. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But one person's or group's freedoms cannot impose undue burdens upon another person or group's freedom. So those are some of the 10 elements or principles of culture. Culture is not faith or religions. It's not about politics and ideology. It's certainly not about Black Lives Matter or fads and fashion and rock and roll music, which I loved, and hip hop, which I don't care for. Worldviews and philosophies. In the 20th century, we had some really bad ones, such as fascism, Nazism, nihilism, and communism. And today, in the 21st century, we have bad ideas like atheistic humanism, communism, socialism, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and radical Islam. Now, democracy requires educated, informed citizens willing to assimilate, accept, and obey all just laws in America. Training for life and education begins in the home. How can we speak of and defend universal human rights in a cultural climate in which the very idea of truth is under sustained assault by ignorance today? That we cannot understand others without truth. We can't correct injustices without truth. We can't be saved without truth. Can you really love Christ if you don't know him? So culture battles are in fact ongoing debate and political struggle between those who believe that human beings can, however inadequately, grasp the truth of how we ought to live together, and those for whom any notion of truth involves the imposition of someone's values on someone else. So culture is not just about science and technology. It's not just about the arts, music, and literature. It's all these things combined. But most of all, it's about faith and spirituality. So here's some examples of truths. We have both objective and subjective truths. All sciences and technology are objective truths, as is math. The arts and music are subjective truths. Medical health is both an art and a science. The fertilized egg is 100% human, 100% of the human genome. That's objective science. It's validated. And faith and trust is both objective and subjective. Laws, our civil laws, are objective and many are subjective. So how do we arrive at this position in society today? What were the motivating force? Why do we not perceive such events earlier and change them before they materialized? The answer is when you're in the eye of the storm, you cannot see the pending disaster. So let's clearly define some other things. Made in God's image means mentally and spiritually, not physically. We are all transcendent spiritual persons. We have a higher purpose and calling by our Creator. We are constantly in pursuit of wisdom. Wisdom is defined as truth plus reason times experience. So wisdom equals T plus R times E. Truth plus reason times experience. And when our body dies, our spirit lives on because it's immortal. For example, people who experience temporarily out-of-body experience told us this when they were revived. Blind people, interesting enough, who had an out-of-body experience were able to see some relatives, spiritual relatives. Some encountered and talked to them. So the American Constitution is based on these key Judeo-Christian principles by the founders: sanctity of life, liberty, equality before the law, dignity of the individual responsibility, peace and justice, and love as the foundation for all. We must return to our Judeo-Christian principles and moral values. And I must point out at this point that Islam, Hindu, and other faiths are not compatible with Catholic philosophy or theology. During the 1,000 years of the Roman Empire, about 75% of the world's population were slaves. Throughout the 17th and 18th century, Muslim traders kidnapped African people and sold them to South America, Middle America, and to the United States. The North's victory over the South freed 4 million enslaved people. But the legacy of slavery continued to influence American history until after the emancipation. President Lincoln, by the way, he established a Republican Party. With his Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, tried to end slavery, but it took another century to materialize. Now, does equality really exist? It's an ideal. We are all born unequal, physically, mentally, economically, and our environment. We don't select parents, our tribe, and our initial religion. Equal opportunity is good, excellent, but equal outcome is bad. We should not dictate what the outcome will be. Equality under the law is an ideal, which society should always endeavor to achieve. But those who have better lawyers get more equality in the law. But again, thank God we are not all the same, otherwise it would be a very boring world. Now, should we repress smarter, richer people? Talented people? I don't think so. African Bishop Tutu said it well. We are all different talents, and let us celebrate our diversity. Let's get into Black Lives Matter. If you checked out their website, blacklivesmatter.org, you'll find this is an exact quote. We dismantle patriotic practices that require mothers to work double shifts, that they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family, and so on and so forth. We foster a queer affirming network. So these are more communist ideas, destroying the family. Now, it gained much more influence and money following the death of George Floyd, and all those protests have taken place worldwide. They have clearly exploited the tragic death of Mr. Floyd for political and financial advantage. If we look at what the national chairman of racial equality said, there is a difference between protesters and leaders who run the Black Lives Matter organization. Founder Alicia Garza says she is a Marxist. That's clear. She is one of the 3 leading founders of Black Lives Matter. The chairperson of the Congress of Racial Equality also said that defunding the police is just the beginning of what Black Lives Matter organization wants. It's a Marxist mentality that does nothing for the black community. It does nothing to advance racial equality. Causing disruption of the nuclear family is clear and present danger to the black community. About 70 to 75% of black families today do not have a father that lives at home. We'll get to that later. Fatherlessness represents a crisis for all races. The most famous goal of BLM is defunding police services. The black community, he says, does not actually want less police. They want less bad police. And he said there are bad apples in every profession. We all know that. So let's look at some census numbers. Census Bureau statistics indicate that about 13.4% of the total population in 2019 were classified black. While 18.5% are classified Hispanic/Latino. That's excluding the 12 million or so undocumented Hispanics. So the brown people, so-called, the Hispanic Latinos, are far greater in number, and they're growing at a greater growth rate. So why is that so? They're growing at about 30% per year. So black people are 13% of the U.S. population, yet they account for 38% of all abortions. That's why. The black abortion rate, abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44, is 3.8 times greater than all others. So Black Lives Matter substitutes Marx's communist class conflict between blackness and whiteness. The black versus white creates a permanent enemy class. The president of Black Lives Matter, his name is in New York, Hawk Newsom, said, quote, "If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down the system and replace it." All right, I could be speaking figuratively, or I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. And Newsom said this on nationwide TV on Fox, The Story with Martha McCown. I ask you, have not Asians, Irish, Hispanics, Jews, and Muslims experienced racism and economic hardship? Of course they have. Why are they not shouting, brown lives matter, Jewish lives matter? The truth is, all lives matter. Sadly, Black Lives Matter funding, they get millions of dollars from corporate America, from the political system, from our taxes, and I learned lately, from Catholic charities. A selective list of their supporters include the Democracy Alliance, the Ford Foundation, and George Soros. It's terrible. I think they're approaching $500 million in funding. Now, everybody is a slave to something. We are slaves to our jobs, which some of us do not enjoy. We are slaves to our families, which hopefully most of us enjoy. We are slaves to bad habits, like drugs and alcohol and sex, which only can be replaced by good habits. How many of us are really slaves to drugs, which are destroying our youth? And we all are slaves to sin and seek the mercy and love of Christ, which is the only act that can actually remove our shackles. What is social justice? Some say it's equitable distribution of wealth. Is it equitable and reasonable to give to those who earn their money by their intellect and hard work, and by taking risks to distribute their earnings to those who never developed their own skills, never took any risks, and worked much less? That is a clear definition of socialism. How has socialistic societies worked out so far? Look at Venezuela, for example. We have freedom, justice, and opportunity, but the Constitution does not give us any guarantees of economic outcomes or success. That depends on each individual's ingenuity, skills, risk-taking, and determination. And I ask you, what's wrong with learning carpentry, plumbing, electrical trades, among others? These skills certainly pay more than some academic areas. So there's no free ride. One has to earn their ticket to economic success. The real goal of education is to know and appreciate the goodness of this life and to know the wonder of the Lord. Let's focus on faith, religion. Vatican II introduced a liberation theology. We saw pagan idols celebrated at the altar of St. Peter's by the Pope. Many clergy, bishops, asking for same-sex marriage or no longer condemning it. Abortionists and divorcees receive Holy Communion. Homosexuality in our seminary schools and priesthood and by bishops is allowed. Borders are bad, says Pope Francis, but no nation can exist without borders. Even the Vatican itself has 30-foot walls. And moral teaching is no longer based on the deposit of faith. We need to get back to traditional Catholic values. So what's the results of Vatican II and the liberation theology? A Pew study recently showed that there are 6 times more Catholics lost for every new convert to Catholicism. 6 times. Let's look at some of these statistics in a little more detail. Sunday Mass attendance has declined from 74% in 1958. In 2000, it was 25%. 1/3. A reduction of 2/3. Priests have declined, as you can see here, from 65 to 2002. 45,000 priests today in the U.S. It's about 10 times that worldwide. Seminarians dropped off tenfold from 49,000 in 65 to 4,700 in 2002. Baptisms have dropped significantly. Catholic marriages have declined. Annulments have increased from 333 to 50,000. And in ordinations to the priesthood, dropped off precipitously. Look at that, from 1,575 to 450 today, average. Or 2002, I should say. And religious sisters, they're getting out of the business. The average age of those who are still in the system is 68 years. So the Gallup poll on weekly Catholic attendance, you can see it dropped off precipitously after Vatican II. And of course, the child abuse scandals by the bishops and priests was a major factor. The gap between priests and Catholics in the USA. You can see, while more Catholics occurred in the past 50 years, the number of priests has declined enormously. So post-Vatican II, priests did not keep up with the needs of the church. So we might ask, why are they leaving? How can Catholics be sustained in their faith without priests? The answer is failure. Failure of leadership. The deposit of faith has been diluted or altered after Vatican II. Marginalized. Morality is compromised. Idols are allowed in the St. Peter's Church. Homosexuality is throughout the system. Abortions are tolerated. Divorcees are now allowed to receive Holy Communion. Church leaders who do not face this dilemma either do not understand the problem or they do not have the courage to deal with it. Such a church will drift aimlessly, replacing true faith with liberation theology, diluting past moral teachings, standing for less and less, for fear that another part of the congregation will be offended and leave. Results: there is a disappearance of many churches in France, Germany, Italy, and Europe. This is one of the key issues of today's society. So we have to get back to that all-time religion, revitalizing our Christian values of charity, faith, and traditions, restoring Christian values in America. There is always a risk in doing something, but I submit to you, there's a greater risk in doing nothing. We have left and right extremism. The German church, for example, is pushing a liberal plan, in close partnership with the Committee of German Catholics, a lay group. They're demanding ordination of women, an end to clerical celibacy, the blessing of same-sex unions, and rethinking all Catholic teachings on sexuality. On the other hand, in direct contrast, the Polish or Eastern Church is traditional and conservative in its teachings. Right next door, they are going to sticking with pre-Vatican theology. So under the leadership of this German Cardinal Reinhard Marx of Munich, the church in Germany is pursuing a radical, binding path that seeks to dislodge settled church teaching. To be a true follower of Jesus Christ, we must live in conformity to his original teachings. We must realize that the deposit of faith given to us by Christ through the apostles cannot change with time, since Christ is outside of time and space. He is timeless. We must not, therefore, add or subtract from the original deposit of faith to suit our current or future whims. Catholics need to participate in the secular world and bring traditional Christian values into the discussion. We cannot ignore this. It is critical that the church leadership take positions on policy issues such as Black Lives Matter and radical liberalism. Another organization called Antifa is an anti-fascist movement that engages in militant protests, violent protests. These extreme left members are self-proclaimed anti-capitalist enemies of the right. When good people such as our bishops remain silent, evil always triumphs. Here we have an image of Pope Francis with pagan idols from Brazil presented in St. Peter's Basilica. He even put them on the altar. He claims that all faiths are valid. So Jesus is reduced to the level of Buddha, Mohammed, and paganism. No, Jesus is the Father's beloved Son, the one in whom the Father is well pleased. Here's some of those idols. They were thrown in the Tiber. Somebody rescued them from the Tiber, cleaned them off, and put them on the altar. Pope Francis' agenda is to create a revolution in the church, to adapt the church to modernism. He claims we must follow the United Nations leadership. Mercy, mercy for all. The church is again at a crossroads in its history. According to Canon Law 213, bishops do not have the authority to ban Catholic Mass and the sacraments. The Church has never closed its doors to Christians who need the sacraments in its 2,000-year history. Even during world wars and other pandemics, priests, bishops served the people's needs. For example, St. John Paul II, when he was a priest, he held secret masses underground during the communist era. The responsibility of the bishops is to minister to the faithful and in celebrating the Mass and administering the sacraments. This trumps any order by a superior or secular civil authorities. This is divine law. Bishops must take up their cross and carry it. Bishops could have planned Easter Sunday Masses in 2020. There were practical solutions in Florida and many other states. The governor of Florida and other states, some other states, never banned Christian services. Even if they did, the separation of church and state, the bishop should have been strong and said, no, we will not close our doors. Government is responsible for protecting us physically. Bishops are responsible for saving our souls. That's their primary mission of all bishops. The Pope is accused of a cover-up by Archbishop Vigano. This is a man who gave 60 years of his life to the church. He was the third highest ranking bishop in the Vatican. Then he was demoted to the nuncio to the United States. And while he was 5 years in the United States, he realized the corruption that was going on in the church. So this former Vatican diplomat, Vigano, wrote a letter accusing Francis of being complicit in covering up accusations against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Archbishop Vigano claims Benedict disciplined McCarrick for his abuses of seminarians and priests and children as well. U.S. bishops promised an investigation, but it's been 5 years since they made that promise. Then we have the communist China deal made by the Pope, the Vatican, in 2019. The Secretary of State under Pope Francis signed a secret agreement giving control over an appointment of all bishops to the communists. It's called the United Front of China under Bishop Fang. They also agreed not to permit minor children in Catholic churches or schools. Cardinal McCarrick, the evil one, negotiated this agreement. There are about 12 million underground Catholics in China, and they are now in danger. Pope's American racism agenda. The Vatican seized on George Floyd's tragic death and suggested a coordinated messaging strategy aimed at the American Catholic Church. He criticizes them for political and ideological partisanship. It was really an effort to call out conservative Catholics for whom the abortion issue is paramount, while he says other life issues dear to him, racism, immigration, death penalty, and poverty, have played second fiddle in America. He's wrong. He also proclaimed that President Trump is not a Christian because he builds borders. Well, The Pope lives in the Vatican, which is surrounded by 30-foot walls. Unbelievable. Our funds, CCHD funds, are going to support Black Lives Matter. Most Catholics don't know that. So, at least 8 organizations are funded by Catholic Campaign for Human Development as well. And some of these are funding abortion and abolition of police departments. It's terrible. So we have to restore Catholic values. We cannot ignore the secular world. Bishops say that, well, the secular world is up to the layman. That's not true. They have to participate. They have to stand up and be counted. We must never monkey with the deposit of faith. There's a lack of morality in the Western society. Church leaders must take responsibility for positions on all these radical ideas. When they remain silent, evil always triumphs. Pope Francis is also overturning many of John Paul II's teachings and moral theology. So whatever we do or don't do in life has eternal consequences. Here are some words from Saint John Paul II. Freedom consists in not doing what we like, but having the right to do what we ought to do. Science can purify religion, and religion can purify science. Social justice cannot be attained by violence. Violence kills what it intends to obtain. Right and wrong are no secret to anyone until they begin to deny that right and wrong exists. Ideas on human virtues such as kindness, compassion, tolerance, charity, regardless of gender, ability, and race, originated in the Bible. Christianity has been supreme during times of great adversity and is rarely at its best during times of economic prosperity. During this pandemic crisis, we must once again awaken to the need for people to seek the mercy and love of Jesus Christ. Let's talk about the pandemic. Here's a list of 5 of a dozen pandemics and plagues that existed. These are the most significant ones. The virus of 2019, it began in actually November in China, in communist China. And it was discovered in January 2020 by our scientists. And therefore, President Trump put a stop to it right away. He stopped all travel from China and a month later from all of Europe. So, during this pandemic, we must once again awaken to the need for people to seek the mercy and love of Jesus Christ. During the Great Pandemic, for example, in Rome in 590 AD, Pope Gregory the Great pleaded with God and led a spiritual procession with an image of the Blessed Mother of Christ around the streets of Rome. As they approached Hadrian's tomb, Pope Gregory saw a vision of Michael the Archangel on top of the tomb overlooking the city, sheathing his sword, a sign that the possession is pleasing to God. The plague ended immediately. We must awaken to the truth that there is more important meaning to life than merely existing, procreation, accumulation of wealth, status, and power. We might recognize that we are transcendent spiritual beings with human bodies and eternal souls. By allowing this evil virus to spread in the world, the Lord places an obstacle in our persistent path to damnation. So the positive aspect of this pandemic is that God so loves his creation that is good, especially humanity, and he wants to save those who are otherwise heading towards the abyss. He turns the Chinese Communist evil lies and pandemic into a powerful message, while also respecting our free will to choose which path to take. So let's talk about the bishop's role in saving souls. As I said before, the church has never closed its doors in 2,000 years, even during world wars and other epidemics, pandemics. Priests and bishops always served the needs of the people. All right, so we got to listen to the voices of the sheep and their cries to the faithful. Interesting enough, lately, Catholicism has, the original Catholicism, pre-Vatican II, is starting to rise. There's many millions of people are becoming more interested. Okay, so let's come to some solutions. Morality has to be restored based on traditions and the Bible, the deposit of faith. We must outreach to provide assistance to Hispanic families. They're going to become a significant percent of the U.S. in the next few years, probably on the order of 30% of the population. We need civic support and Spanish masses. We got to teach English, American history, and about the Constitution. We got to avoid confusion on the truth of the Catholic theology. Seminars on the real deception of socialism have to begin. We got to coach the teens on the meaning of the Bible. We got to focus on fathers to get their children to Mass. It's not going with the flow. It's being a real Catholic that counts. You know, if you look at the evil contagion, events that led up to Vatican deal with China on February 16th, the Global Times said that Archbishop McCarrick advised the Vatican that the Maoist attitude towards religions has changed, he declared. Quote, because of that, there may be more changes in the future to allow China to develop their own religious lives in a good and healthy way, close quotes. President Xi could be persuaded to launch a great new moment in history with the Vatican, he said. That there's similarities between Xi and Pope Francis. That could be a special gift to the world. I see a lot of things happening that would really open doors. Both leaders are similar mind on issues of caring for the poor, the older people, children, our civilization, especially our ecology. But McCarrick forgot about the 350 million abortions introduced into China based on their one-child policy in 1979. He forgot about they have concentration camps for over 1 million Muslims in China today. Well, Pope Francis finally got around to defrocking McCarrick in 2018, 5 years after Pope Benedict said he should be restricted. 5 years later, Benedict restricted his role in the church in 2018. So they made a final deal with Communist China, and the Vatican did not consult with Cardinal Zinn, the Catholic Archbishop of all China, appointed by St. John Paul II. The Chinese then tore down 2 shrines dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary. One of them was Our Lady of Seven Sorrows. Finally, the Chinese Communist government lied to humanity and covered up the greatest pandemic in human history. These are historical facts. So we have to get back to basics: love of God and love of neighbor. Pope Francis is the first political pope. He has publicly supported Joe Biden and is against President Trump. Pope Francis publicly stated that Trump is not a Christian. Yet, President Trump is the only recent president to advocate for pro-life and is totally against abortions. Vice President Joe Biden advocates for all forms of abortion, including late-term abortions. So I ask you, who is the real Christian here? How do we know God? We know him by his word, the Bible, his fulfilled prophecies, his teachings while on earth, the Gospels, his witnesses, by human reasoning, logic, and trust, which is faith, and by the beauty and wonder of his creation. I want to end this short presentation with a beautiful image which I copied from a lecture given by Professor Jordan Peterson. This caught my eye. It's a symbolic old painting. It shows the Virgin Mary there giving the fruit of life of Christ from the cross of Christ, from the tree of life and death. And you have the original Eve giving the fruit of death to society. What a contrast. What is the good of life? We must stop unnecessary suffering by helping others. We must overcome our fears. We must reach our potential and transcend our mortality. Thank you for your attention. Here's my website, 5starpubs.com. And this book is available. I'm updating it. Thank you very much. Finally, we should all pray for Pope Francis, who seems to be misguided, that the Holy Spirit will once again guide him for the sake of Holy Mother Church.